Ph.D. Hard Talk, Dr. Jeff. Could you please introduce yourself in terms of what you do, your PhD journey to postdoc to where you are?
Of course. My name is Jeff Lees. I'm an assistant professor of organizational behavior, and my background is in social psych. I work at the University of Groningen in the north of the Netherlands. I completed my PhD in 2020 in organizational behavior and social psychology from Harvard, and then I spent 2 years at Clemson University in the US as a visiting assistant professor, and then another 2 years as an associate research scholar at Princeton University. That's basically like an advanced postdoc. And then last fall, 2024, I started my assistant professor position here.
Lovely, and congratulations
Thank
on your
you.
new position, and welcome to Europe.
Absolutely. Hi, my name is Robyn Douglas. I'm a fifth year clinical psychology doctoral candidate at Texas A&M University in Texas, in America. And I'm also a Ford Foundation pre-doctoral fellow. And so I think that's an important thing to mention because the Ford Foundation provided me with the funding to be able to contribute to my burgeoning research agenda throughout my doctoral program. And I'm happy to also share a little bit about my research. So my work tends to look at the intersections of clinical psychological science and critical consciousness and sociopolitical development for underserved youth and adolescents and young adults. And so I use various different avenues in order to really figure out the best ways to not only look at individualized forms of healing for underserved communities, but also collectivist and communal forms of healing. And an important way to address that is to not only look at the symptoms that we see young people engaging in when they're experiencing psychological distress, right? Not just looking at externalizing symptoms or depression or anxiety on an individual basis, but also keeping in mind the different systems that contribute to chronic distress within them, within their families, and within their communities. And some of those more systematic inequalities that I also look at can include policy issues that are leading to disadvantages in underrepresented communities, neighborhoods, environmental injustice that we see happening more likely in communities of color, incarceration injustice, immigration injustice. And so, again, recognizing that yes, every young person is unique and there are biological components and nurturing components within the family system that can impact their mental health, but also when we look at the disparities that certain communities are facing more often than others, it's also important to keep in mind the role that systems that are outside of their control are doing to perpetuate their distress. And so as a clinician, as a researcher, I'm really passionate about bridging gaps in accessibility so that we're making sure that even if youth don't have clinical resources within their neighborhoods, which a lot of them often don't due to systemic impact, that we're bringing research, that we're bringing mental health resources to the community and not just within the ivory tower. And so I've done that through mixed methods. I use large quantitative data sets that look at youth on a national scale. Me being located in the Gulf Coast of Texas in Houston, I'm also collecting quantitative and qualitative data from youth here using youth participatory action research.
Job sucks. Thankfully, Europe is a lot better in this. Europe is a lot better in valuing, the idea that like you should be able to work in the place where you grew up. You shouldn't have to move 1,000 miles for 2 years just to, increase the chances that you're going to get a faculty job by a small margin. But because academia is now more precarious, there's fewer jobs, it's going to increase all those things. And, I would, as someone who, again, the pandemic was bad luck, but as someone who, as with everything that's uncertain, in some very literal ways, you're rolling the dice. As someone who had to roll the dice repeatedly and suffer very negative consequences over it, I would say do not underestimate how much that can suck. and how much it can be a real detriment on you, on your well-being, on your relationships, right? To have to basically your whole family has to subordinate everything to academia, right? So, I live in Europe, and I live in Europe because Europe, yeah, by coincidence, Europe tends to value the type of research I do more than the US, right? US business schools aren't that interested in climate change. Take that for what it's, right? We can all guess as to why that's the case, but like, I was much more successful in Europe because because I do interdisciplinary work, which all of academia claims to value, but I think Europe genuinely values it more than US actually tolerates it. And I do work on climate change, which Europe also values more. And so, I live in the Netherlands solely because of the job market, right? And I live in an amazing city. The cost of living is really low. It's one of the safest, most like family-friendly places in the country. Like, it's wonderful to live here. But my wife and I are on the other side of the planet from our family, right? It's hard to maintain strong friendships when you're moving every two to
I
three
will speak
years.
from someone pursuing a PhD in a clinical and research field. Having a degree that requires an extensive amount of time also allows you an extensive amount of time to grow your skill set. And so while, I came into my doctoral program with a master's degree in counseling where I had 2 years of practicing clinical work, I have learned so much more throughout the last 5 years because I've had the time to be able to train from different clinicians across multiple fields, not just psychologists, but social workers as well, psychiatrists, across various settings, at jails, at different hospitals, at private practices, and doing telehealth. And it's given me the time to really grow as a clinician, as a provider, and to really take into account the various different populations that need support, and recognizing that like there is no one size fits all approach to clinical care. So that's from a clinical lens, right? From a research lens, I think it's operated quite similarly. It takes a lot of time, turns out, to develop your own research projects. I came into my doctoral program thinking, great, by end of year 2, I'll probably know what I want to do for my dissertation. I can just get started, right? That did not happen.